Hello, everyone. This is Agile Leaders episode 21st, I guess, and this will be the first episode of 2019. After a long period, we are together again, and today we have Natal Dank as our guest. We will talk about Agile HR topic, which is quite popular thing nowadays. Welcome, Natal. Thank you very much accepting our invitation and joining us at this episode.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we will be co-hosting today with Melike. She is one of the team members in the Agile Turkey community. So during the show, if you have any questions to us, you can use Agile Leaders hashtag on Twitter and also LinkedIn, I guess. So we will be checking frequently these channels, and if you have questions, we will be directing your questions at the end of the show. So thank you again joining us, Natal, and we know you. You are, I guess, the founder of the Agile HR Community. And so could you please introduce yourself to our community and to watchers?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm sitting in a little basement hotel room in London. I am Australian, hence the accent, but I live over in the UK. And yes, I co-founded the Agile HR Community a couple of years ago with a lady that's based in Finland called Rita Hellstrom. And we both come from the world of HR. So sorry, but we've seen the light. And we're now on a mission to reinvent HR with Agile mindset. And part of it is about helping HR people firstly understand what Agile is and really invite them to start to experiment and learn around it. And the other part is then how do we use that to start to redesign HR for the future of work? And as we were just discussing, get rid of the resources part and just call it about humans and people practices.
Cool. Actually, as you mentioned, we were talking about the using the resource word for people in 2019. So we thought that it's a kind of old school and traditional kind of word. So saying it as a people operations is quite, I think, kind word. So thank you very much for that quick introduction of you. So we would like to discuss the agile mindset and agile thing in the people domain, let's say, in the agile HR domain. So let's start with the defining the agile HR. And I mean, is the kind of thing that the agile practices used in the HR teams nowadays, or it's the kind of and making the changes, making the transformations in the companies using the agile mindset? So which one do you use?
Yeah, so we use both. So so I always talk about there's two sides to Agile HR. So the first I call, for want of better words, Agile for HR. So this is about HR teams embracing the mindset and taking on the tools and techniques to redesign how they work themselves. So this is, this kind of stems from using Kanban boards, of course, in the office, creating multifunctional, cross-functional teams, and generally trying to then push that out beyond across the business as well. So you'll have HR teams sort of breaking down their own silos. And, for example, over the years, I looked after talent, or I looked after reward, or I looked after performance. And the idea is that one person shouldn't look after these massive, big, complex topics. You need a cross-functional team to get that done. So all the same concepts that you're seeing in Agile and other parts of the business. So that's happening in HR teams. And what that allows is this true co-creation. So what also used to happen a lot in HR is that we used to blueprint and think that we would just follow best practice and roll out these big programs, a new performance management system, and would roll it out across the organization. And it wasn't until people started to use it that they'd go, oh, this doesn't work for us. This is not good for us. And then we'd spend the next 2 years trying to make everyone like it and saying things like, oh, it's for the conversation, not about the tool, which we know it's So what this is about is letting go of that and truly embracing incremental development, putting your people as your customer in the heart of what you do, and start to really test and learn and co-create solutions with them. So that's Agile for HR, and that's about us using it. And of course, the other side is HR for Agile. So this is about how do we start to redesign things like performance and reward and recruitment, people development for an Agile world. So how does this look for teams that are more self-organizing? What does this mean for leaders? How do you recruit for roles like PO and Scrum Master? What does this mean for organizations? The other big key part of that is pulling on our previous experience of organizational design and organizational development, and really helping people like yourselves do Agile transformation. So what does that look like? How do you evolve a scaling approach? What does it mean to scale Agile across your organization? Should you all go Agile? Should you not? Therefore, what kind of governance do you need? How do you develop leaders to guide that? So it's all of these kind of questions. So this is a real big new world for HR. We have come from a legacy, and we'll probably talk about that soon, and we don't necessarily.
I think there's a technical problem.
Yeah. You understand this? Oh, was that?
We lost you 10 seconds or
oh,
so.
No. Okay. So basically, there's two sides, and they go hand in hand.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So if we think both sides, what are the roots of the Agile HR? What was the motivation that we use the Agile word with HR domain?
Yeah, well, some people say that it's a contradictory statement to have Agile and HR in the same sentence, which I totally agree. I think the history probably reflects a bit of my own personal story. So as someone like myself, I worked in in-house HR roles for many years. It was always about building a great place to work, but we did have a bit of a legacy of how we've done HR systems up until now. And so it wasn't until I personally worked in an Agile organization that I went, oh, wow, okay, I get it. And I also now understand how we have to redesign HR. So when I saw the light, I just thought, oh my God, this is the future. Because if you embrace an Agile mindset with how you evolve HR, so the first kind of time I used it was I left HR. I was a bit disheartened with what was happening in-house. I was using 25-box matrices and things like that. And I thought, no, we need to find a new way of doing this. And I went out and I started my own consulting, and one of my key clients was booking.com, which of course we work very agile from word go. And I was challenged to work in a very different way. And what it was is that they wanted to evolve performance and reward for the agile teams. And I did what HR consultants always do. I went and read research, I went and interviewed people, I looked at best practice, I looked at what Google was doing, and then I said, oh, you should do this, and you should just do it Big Bang style and a waterfall style. And of course, the head of IT then said, well, how do you know it's going to work? And I said, oh, well, it's best practice. Of course, this is what other teams, other organizations are doing. And he said, well, in my line of business, we would test this, we would experiment, get the data, and then we'd make some changes. And that's what you have to do. And so without really knowing agile practices at the time, I invited teams to experiment with how to do performance. And in particular, we looked at how to give feedback to each other first, what works for them, what doesn't. And what happened is after this period of time, there was some evidence that things like quarter bonuses tied to ratings was getting in the way of having really good discussions. So we made our first change. And the change that we did was quite groundbreaking at the time. But because everyone was so involved in the experimentation and they were part of giving feedback, they were really happy to embrace the change because they were part of the change. And I went, wow, this is how you need to do HR. And so I did that say 5, 6 years ago, and then went and learnt about Agile because I thought, oh, this is the future. I went out looking, is there anyone doing Agile HR? I found a couple of people. One of them was Rena Hellstrom in Finland, who I now collaborate with. But at the time, there was really not very many people. There was another lady in Sweden called Pia Maria Thoren, who's written a book, Agile People. And then I started some meetups to find if there was anyone out there. And to be honest, most people that came to meetup to start with was either Agile people or HR people that might work at a tech organization and are kind of interested but still didn't really know what it means. But now, you know, several years later, like the first London meetup was 2016. So now you've got hundreds of people turning up, and it's all because their organization's going Agile. This is where the future's going, and they now need to understand. And there's a sort of urgency now with HR. Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with the why. Why do we need a perspective change in the HR domain? Don't you think that there are practices and tools that we use like a decade ago can we use them today, or why do we need a perspective change?
So I often talk about the history of both HR and management thinking. So I like to take us all back to Frederick Taylor, who wrote a book called Scientific Management back in 1911. And he basically was the creator of the production line and specialization. And at the time, it was groundbreaking. It went viral for those days. But what it basically said was to have efficiency in your production line and mass production was we needed to specialize and specifically train people for a certain role and certain tasks, and we had to closely manage them doing that. Also, the Taylor concept brought in things like pay for performance, workplace planning. There was a separation of the thinking, so
fingers and doers.
Yeah, exactly, and the doing. So, and this is basically the birth of HR management or human resources. And that legacy built our organizations in the last century. You know, it then became the structure of our organizational chart, that top-down control. You needed more layers, you needed more decision handovers to get the job done. Now, we all know the kind of history of Agile, and then we get to about the 80s, that production line gets challenged. We bring the thinking and doing together in Lean and Toyota. And then, of course, we get to the 90s, internet goes crazy. And 2001, we've got the manifesto, and off we go. And Agile is a response to the complexity and the disruption and the exponential change experiencing in the world. And that old cause and effect and Taylor production line way of managing doesn't fit this new working paradigm. But so many of our systems, particularly human, resource systems, are still based on that old ways of thinking. And so you've got this big conflict, and a lot of HR people know that these aren't working and that they're really heavy and they're very compliance driven, and they look at to manage the low performer first before actually thinking about how do we actually just create a great place to work. So for a long time, HR's been thinking we needed a mindset shift, but I think Agile finally gives us a way to do that. And also the world is going Agile, so we better get on board. So that's kind of why we need this perspective change. I also think it gives us a method of how to create the new solutions, because it's not about us going and creating the answers. It's about co-creating with our people through Agile practices. And so I think it's not only just a perspective change, it's a new way of doing HR that will really take us into the future.
So when I witnessed the transformation in different organizations, I see that one of the most difficult parts is leaving the command and control approach and fostering the self-organization and empowering the people, leaving the ropes to the people that does the work. So how do you define the importance for the companies about the empowering people and self-organization so that it can become easier for them to let the ropes to the people actually doing the work. So what do you suggest for the companies about that?
Yeah. So it's a good question. And I think, again, these conflicts of how we've done thinking, you know, management theory and also human resources for a long time up until now. There's a couple of things. One is that if you're doing any kind of agile transformation, you need to be talking about people practices from the word go. And I feel that that hasn't been happening until now. So HR people aren't necessarily even on part of the transformation team, which is a big problem. I know a company that have they've gone fully agile for a couple of years. They're using SAFe as a big kind of, you know, scaling model. And it's only now that they're talking about the need to evolve performance and all of these kind of things, because quite quickly, old ways of doing HR becomes blockers to things like self-organization. So from word go, we should be talking about it and we should all be working together. So that's about bringing the two worlds together of agile and HR. The other one, however, is kind of going back to, if we hire awesome people, we don't hire them to tell them what to do. It's a total waste of time. So, and we've got to start embracing this. So we, you know, HR, are we still there? Yep. Yeah. You know, in the world of HR, we constantly talk about finding great people, for the war of talent. You know, how do we get the best people for the job? And so we go through all this great length, and then what? We tell them what to do. That's just, it just doesn't make sense. So first of all, is kind of flipping it and saying, well, what's the people experience of work and how do we make it a great experience? And if we start thinking along those lines, then we start to look at it very differently. The other one is that in a world, you know, let's think about where Agile's come from. It's all about dealing with complexity and tapping into the network. Because if you want to rapidly respond to the changes that are happening with you, if you want to rapidly respond to your customer, then we know that we need to tap into the network and we need small agile teams to make that happen. And so Steve Denning, who's a great writer on this, always talks about the 3 new rules: the rule of the customer, the rule of small teams, and the rule of the network. And if you want that to actually happen in your organization, and we've now got big banks through to, you know, huge retailers all wanting to go agile because they want to tap into the power of how do you rapidly respond in the network. And so the organizational design is changing. But if you want to embrace that, then you have to embrace this concept of self-organization and you have to let teams make their own decisions. So I think it feels like a big step, but actually if you define why you're embracing Agile and where you want to go with it as an organization, then quite quickly people understand why you might need to change culture and roles. I would say that the other blocker is that HR people aren't often involved in transformation, but sometimes senior leaders aren't either. So Agile often happens at the team level, and this is where all the energy and the excitement and, you know, momentum happens, where senior leaders can sometimes be separate, sort of talking about going agile, but not necessarily being part of it. So also, how do you make sure that the leaders are experiencing agile, understanding what it is, so they can start to think, oh, okay, my role fundamentally shifts now. My role is about alignment, you know, where are we going with vision and purpose, and then removing blockers. So that concept of alignment and autonomy that we really need to create. So my thing is it's all about mindset. It's all about evolving your own kind of approach, but it's thinking about what's your purpose as an organization and where you want to go with that, and how do you allow your great people to take you there.
So it's great. Actually, I like the phrase that we don't hire people's talents and say them what to do and how to do. So it's very nice. I may use it in the future soon. So I loved it. So also another challenge after you do piloting about the transformation or trying different frameworks, etc., and try to encourage the teamwork within the organization, then another question comes to the people's mind exactly is, how about the performance management? For example, we have individual targets in our systems, and maybe sometimes it conflicts with the targets of the different people or different domains in the organization. Then you are asking me now to achieve goals as a team, but we have conflicting targets. So especially in the organizations that wasn't born in already agile, like the startups, in the huge organization, you cannot transform the whole organization in one day or in a short to main some part of the organization in the as a setup maybe, and then convert some part of the organization as an experiment and see how it goes. So how do you see the evolution in the performance management in this kind of organization, especially in the huge organization that goes bi-model at the same time? What do you suggest about it?
So performance management is a massive topic. We could do a whole kind of webinar on. So I'll keep it brief, but
also maybe I can also add recognition mechanism as well. Like for example, you are giving rewards for people like heroes, etc. So also this may have to change, I guess. So maybe you can answer both.
Yeah, of course. It's a great complex problem, isn't it? It's multi-layered. It's interconnected. For a lot of organizations, as you said, if you're a startup, you maybe have been able to create a culture and a way of doing this differently. But what also alarms me is sometimes startups get bigger and they go and bring in very traditional ways of doing HR, which kind of goes against their culture. So that's a big thing to sort of question as well. But definitely the big organizations going agile, how do they start to evolve performance and reward? My kind of big sort of message is that it's not one size fits all, and it is all about experimentation and co-creating with your people. So what's really interesting is we've got some organizations that they've gone agile, maybe in the tech area, there's been a lot of kind of feedback that they need to change performance and rewards. So they've gone in there and worked with them to create a new way of doing it. Often there's a movement away from individual performance metrics toward more collective. And I'll talk a bit more about that soon. And often there's a movement away from using ratings and having that direct link and looking at how do you touch into people's reward in a different way. But I know some organizations that went and did that with tech and then went to put it across the rest of the organization. And somewhere like customer service said, no, we don't like that. That doesn't work for us. We actually like some of our more KPI driven systems at the moment. So what HR realized was, actually, we need to create different approaches and solutions, possibly for different parts of the organization. And then it's more about how do you create alignment around values and principles and purpose. So this is the first thing, is moving away from this one size fits all, which what in HR for many years, we always thought that's what you needed because that was the fair equity way of doing it. The second one is definitely looking at where the blockers are, but it's understanding your context. So if you're an organization that has paid for performance for a long time, you've got a CEO that loves to give that bonus and, there's a strong legacy of that, you can't jump to collective reward tomorrow without creating a culture of how to get there. So there's been some organizations that a few years ago got excited about taking out ratings, removing ratings and delinking performance and reward, which sounds great. And it is a great movement to happen. But what happened with some of these organizations is they did that. And then a year later, they brought the ratings back in because people didn't know what to do in the new environment. They didn't incrementally develop a new way of talking about performance and being comfortable to give feedback in new ways, all of these kind of things. So you need to see it as an agile evolution. How do you test and learn, get some data to make key decisions, and how might you do this in different parts of the organization? So that kind of lab approach that you were talking about, it can be the whole organization at once, but you still take them through those incremental changes and be really clear about how you're listening to feedback around what's working and what's not. In a project I did, I set up different experiment groups around performance. And in one of them, I gave them an app to help them give each other feedback, because I thought, oh yeah, this will be great. You know, they'll have a tool and that will be the answer. And they hated it. But because it was agile, I was like, oh, okay, we won't use that. In the past, in my old kind of HR work, I probably would have implemented that across the whole company straight away. And so again, it's about using agile techniques to find the answers. Yeah.
Whole company hates you at one batch then.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You're just hated instantly. Exactly. And, you know, HR gets such a bad name, but sometimes we deserve it, not always. And so it's really about how do you start to build a new culture, comfortability around where you're going with the performance changes. And it's very much about your own context. So at the community, we constantly help people understand where might they be on the spectrum, you know, between kind of full pay for performance, individual rewards versus we can be collective. We've now got some organizations that are fully transparent. You know, they even publish their pay and salaries on the website. But even you're saying, oh, that's it. So, but for some people, that's quite shocking and quite different. So you've got to look at how you evolve your culture over time. And maybe you won't even go to full collective. Maybe it will be a bit of a mixture. So think about pace, think about context, and think about how do I look at different sort of, so it's not, one size doesn't fit all anymore. That's the sort of the big message. Yeah.
I have an additional question on that topic. Actually, it's a kind of general question, but in the context of the performance management, for example, you mentioned that you have tried a kind of application to rate or to give feedback in a team, and team didn't like it, and so actually hate it. So you will try another thing. What if you have an consistent resistance from the whole people trying to while you are trying new things in the performance domain? I mean, for example, you have tried something and people hate it, and then you tried another thing and the people again resisted it and hate it. So what should be the solution? I know there's no direct answer to that question, but
well, I want to dig into that a bit deeper. I'd want to do so. One thing that before kind of jumping to a solution that people test, I'd want to do some discovery work, and I'd want to really understand what's happening with the experience. It could be, and we haven't sort of talked about this, but if you've gone fully agile and your self-organizing teams have found that really good flow, they're managing their own performance. So it may be that it's not about having a solution. It could be it's about pulling back and allowing the teams to do it themselves and then supporting that. But you're not going to know that until you really get into what's going on and being with them. So that kind of discovery, really kind of understanding your customer. I would be using some design thinking. So I'd be asking my people to come in and map the experience with them so I can see what's going on. What do they think? What do they feel? All of those kind of techniques. Also, I would want business people on the agile team that I'm running to do that kind of project. So I wouldn't want just HR people. I'd want people that are doing this as part of the team, and that I hopefully already you'll probably be much closer to what a good solution could possibly look like. But what is interesting is that performance and reward is a very personal thing. And when I've done these kind of projects, I've been in endless debates with teams about, you know, what's the solution, what works, what doesn't, and sometimes the whole room has very different opinions. And it relates to our preferences, how we're motivated, all of that. So I think it's also flipping it and saying, okay, what are we trying to achieve as an organization or as a team? How do we want that to be recognized? How do we want to be able to give each other feedback about what we're doing and understanding where we're at? And ultimately, how do we use that to be a successful business or organization? So I would also be trying to tie it into that, because if it comes If all the resistance is just because people have different preferences, then that can be a bit of a minefield. So how do we say what's the best way of doing this for our organization and our purpose, and also, you know, the customer that we're delivering to? So I'd be trying to linking it to that a bit as well. One other kind of thing I would say is that in the past, if you think about more the Taylor legacy, is we often design systems to manage low performance. So we've always been really concerned, oh, what about if someone performs badly? How do we manage them? What do we do? That's fine, you know, forget about that. Let's create a process where it's all about people performing well, and that's the default, and we're supporting them. So I think rather than performance management, it becomes people support or people, you know, development and growth. So if you flip that mindset again, and don't worry about the low performers, because the low performers, you're going to be onto that straight away. You'll have a discussion with them. It might be that things aren't working out for them for some reason. It might be they're in the kind of wrong role for them. But the team in a self-organizing situation is also going to be talking to that person. And so again, it's also about why are you designing these performance and reward systems? What are they about? What are you trying to achieve?
Also, another $1 million question is about the organizational structure. So we see and hear some models that are popular, and some organizations are sometimes copying those models to their organizational structures. So how do you see that Agile HR practices has impact on the organizational structures, organizational hierarchies? So what should the companies take into account or be mindful about evolving these organizational structures in their company?
Yeah. So it's, again, such a complex, multi-layered question. So I think there's a couple of things. One is that, you know, Agile isn't about supervisors and managers. You know, it's about teams making decisions, and there's roles like product owners and scrum masters and Agile coaches to create this environment of accountability and sort of checks and feedback loops. So what you're trying to show is that, first of all, those old organizational hierarchical structures starts to cause a blocker if you're moving in this way. But I think a lot of the big danger is we bring in Agile ways of working, or as we know, and we don't really challenge that organizational structure. I'm also a bit scared about, so yes, there's lots of scaling models now, and some of them, you know, have good benefits over each other. So you've got Spotify, you've got SAFe, you've got Scrum at Scale, all of these things. What alarms me is some people are introducing that as a kind of replacement of the old organizational structure and trying to fit in managers and supervisors.
Yeah, exactly.
Model, you know, yeah. And so we're not really thinking differently there. So, and in the end, scaling is about scaling a team model that works, and it's about evolving something that fits your organization and your culture. So forget the model and think more about, again, where are we trying to go? Why are you embracing Agile? So for me, it's about how do you get your leaders to truly understand what's the purpose, and their new role of this kind of alignment. Okay, what's the vision? How are our backlogs aligned? How we know that we're all working on the right thing? But then allowing the people to really make the decisions of what they're working on and delivering to the customer. So some way that I've seen it, you know, some examples are allowing sort of parts of the organization to start doing that and have that experience, and then inviting the managers back in and say, well, what's your role now? And a lot of people go, well, I don't have a role, or it's very different. I need to be a coach. I need to be a facilitator. I want to be a PO, and that sort of self-select development. I think the big danger is that if you don't involve leaders directly in the transformation, or you don't, like, if you're doing a transformation, your first Agile team should be your leadership team or your transformation team. They should be using the techniques. And if they use the techniques, they'll quickly get their head around that actually hierarchy just slows this down. But also, again, it's context. So if you're a big, massive bank and you're coming from a very bureaucratic, traditional context and you're trying to move, then how you do this and the pace that you do it with is going to be much different if you're in a fast-moving, startup where the culture's been different from word go. So really think about your own context and really think about how do you adapt within your own constraints and how do you move things over time. Again, agile, test and learn, create big feedback loops in the organization around getting people to reflect on how their hierarchical structures are blocking where they want to go. And then you'd be able to, you want people to make the decisions to move away from that themselves. There's no use, you can force it through structural change, but ultimately they need to get it themselves, don't they?
One additional thing on that topic. For example, I think organizations mostly fears of changing the hierarchy. For example, let's say, imagine a company trying to use some kind of agile practices, and let's say there's a role called manager, and manager's job is to assigning the work to the people inside that organization. So if you would like to use or transform that organization in an agile way, and let's say creating an agile team, so organizations thinks that what will the role of that manager people in such organizations. So I think there could be some. Actually, I would like to ask you the question to you, Natal. What would you recommend that kind of organizations? I mean, if, for example, if they are trying to map the traditional roles to the new roles, to the new agile roles, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I'd say on the whole, it's probably not healthy, because you're again just trying to fit old ways of working into the new, and you're not challenging people to think about how do they fit into this new ways of working. My preference would be to create some type of experience where managers and people and teams are working together in a new way, but open it up as a kind of more of an experiment. We're testing and learning together. We're finding out, what does this mean to me? And I would be having quite open conversations with those managers around, well, where do you see your role now? How do you contribute to this model? And you will have some managers that are naturally much more coaching orientated anyway, and they get it. They see that it's about being more this coach role. It's about facilitating others to get, to do the job. It's about helping them. It's about removing blockers, and they'll naturally find where to go with that. Or they might redefine what a manager is, and they'll give it a kind of term. There'll be others where that will be quite a conflict for them. But again, how do you, if they can see the success of Agile as a ways of working because it commercially creates.
We will be back, I guess, in a couple seconds.
Success. Hello?
Hi again.
Hi, sorry.
It's fine. Just lost last, I guess, 15 seconds now.
Okay.
Okay. I think we got the message. So if we would like to change our company or our organization, so we need to think out of the box, not trying to map the old traditional roles with the new roles. Maybe we should redefine the roles again, as you mentioned, redefine for example, the manager's role. So to make this, actually, the multi-million-dollar question is coming right now.
I thought we've just had them. We've had about 5.
So it's the last question, but not least question, because Agile HR domain is a huge domain, as you mentioned at the beginning. So I think we can do a special webinar to each question that we directed to you. So maybe if we have time in the future, we would love to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
So the last question is about the culture, because we talk about the physical things so far. I mean the organizational hierarchy, performance management, and some kind of practices that we can use during our transformation. So the culture is not a thing that you cannot hold with your hands. It's like a ghost, but it affects all the things that we do during our transformation efforts. So what does the Agile HR domain or Agile HR define as a new culture model? And
yeah, well, I'm a bit, so I've worked in HR for a long time, and the amount of cultural models that I know and have worked with, and have assessed people on, or assessed, there's just so many out there. So I'm kind of fearful to say what is the new cultural model. I would say it's more about truly embracing mindset. So what is Agile mindset? What are the core values of Agile? And in particular, how does that link to what you are as an organization? So is it about being, is it that your customer is at the heart of what you do? Is it that we experiment and we learn together? Is it that we create a safe space for people to do that? Or for some organizations, it might be more around that kind of rapid testing, taking the ideas through to the customer. So I would be trying to tap into the values of Agile and linking them to the kind of your purpose as an organization, and start to look at how do you evolve your culture in that way, and get people to really embrace the values, because that's what's great for this organization, and that's what makes this a great place to work. And so a lot when I'm looking at Agile HR, I'm always thinking about this virtuous cycle. So if you hire awesome people that are really talented, and you don't tell them what to do, you let them do it, and they are really excited because they get to make great things for their customer, and they get to speak to their customer. They get to kind of really be part of that customer experience. They're really excited, and they create something great for the customer. Your business value is huge as a result. So there's this idea of that three-way value. So how do you build business value through your customer value, and in turn your people value? So this is what we're trying to kind of create. So I don't really want to call it a model, but that's kind of what we're looking for. So, but you need to then shape that for your own context. And, there's a great example. So there's a lady that now she still works in-house as a HR director, but she's so passionate about Agile HR that she runs our London programs for the community. She works in this smaller company, but very agile design tech company called Beyond. They don't pay big. Yeah, they're not, it's not about paying massive amounts of money, but they've created this awesome place to work where people really want to be a part of it. And they're now seen as one of the best companies in the UK. Mm-hmm. And it's all because that you come in there, and it's about working in a self-organizing team. It's about being able to really impact on the customer. It's about being part of the decisions. And the HR team there is really working with the people in the team. So they put together their kind of user stories and backlog for their strategy. They use Moscow techniques to then kind of prioritize. They ask the people in the organization, what's the most important thing to be working on? And then they do little mini sprints to get things done, but they have people from the business in those sprints with them to deliver the solutions. And so everyone is a part of people practices. It's not just the HR team that's doing it. They even do things like use Moscow techniques to look at their recruitment for a period of time. So they get all the people in the room that have the budget to hire certain roles for that quarter. And then they put all the roles up, and they talk about, well, what are the must-have roles? What are the should-have roles? And what that means is you're having a group decision as a company about what roles you should hire. And you're also going to get one manager saying, oh, no, I won't hire that. I don't need that role as much as we need that role in that other part of the organization. And that's where we should spend the money. So it's how do you use the mindset and techniques of Agile to really be managing your organization and for your people. So I think so for me, it's about, know your context, what sort of sits there, what's your purpose as an organization, and then linking the mindset and the values of Agile to that. And it's evolution. We keep talking about transformation and things like there's an end game. there's no end state, you know, it's a constant evolution. And so if we see it more like that, then culture will evolve with what we're doing as well. Yeah.
Maybe let's say 5 years later, we don't call it agile, something other. So it's it's a kind of journey. So
exactly, and like for people like yourself that comes from, you know, agile rather than HR like me, you guys have been doing this for years, and it's like, well, come on, everyone, get on with it. But you know, places like HR are only just beginning to embrace and understand this. So I think exactly, you'll see this kind of moment. You know, the paradigm will really shift in how we work in organizations. But at the moment, we're in this big crossroads where we've got lots of legacy of how we used to work and how we used to think, you know, impacting with these new ways of working. And let's be honest, we've got these great things happening in organizations, but then society and politics and everything, sometimes that's representing a different, you know, set of values. So also we've got a lot of contradictions going on, that we need to kind of navigate through. Yeah,
exactly.
So thank you very much. We are just run out of time. So I think this will be one of the best episodes so far that we have. Thank you very much for your time, Natal. I'm really, I really took some notes to myself.
Me too. Yes.
Work on it. So I hope we will meet you again in the future in some other webinars or so. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is the end of the Agile Leaders episode 21st. See you on the next episodes.
Thank you.